Hello, welcome to another Purple Insider Extra. Matthew Coller along with Sam Ekstrom here. And Sam, we have a head coach press conference to break down. Kevin O'Connell introduced as the Vikings head coach. And what do we do when there's a new press conference to discuss? We read into it way too much. It's the only option. So let's start right out with what Kevin O'Connell talked about as it pertains to Kirk Cousins. The best way I could describe it was that Kevin O'Connell at no point committed himself or chained himself to Kirk Cousins as the Vikings quarterback going forward.
He was firmly rooted in the past. Kirk Cousins has been a good quarterback. Kirk has performed really well. He was rooted in the present. Kirk Cousins is under contract. I'm excited to coach Kirk Cousins. There was no commitment long term. You're absolutely right about that. If there was any kind of soft commitment, it was only this year, saying, well, we can form the offense around Kirk this way. But to me, that's all lip service. That's all theoretical. It's very easy to talk like that after making the statement, well, Kirk is under contract, so these are our plans as of this second today. This is what we would do in theory. But there seemed to be an uncomfortableness to talk about it when he was pressed. Kwesi seemed a little uncomfortable to talk about it. He said, I'm excited that he's excited to Kevin O'Connell. That's all Kwesi could muster. So to me, even though everything that was said technically was pro Kirk, I felt even stronger that there are going to be attempts by this regime to make a move.
Yeah, I think that what they can't speak to right now is what the phone calls are going to say on the other end of the phone from teams that call about potentially trading for Kirk Cousins. That if teams are calling and offers are coming in, well, it's a very fluid situation. You have a Jimmy Garoppolo trade that is most certainly upcoming and San Francisco has not hidden. You have the potential for Aaron Rodgers to be on the move. Like, this is a delicate type of spot if they indeed want to trade Cousins. And there's also the option of adding some void years to Cousins' contract, playing it out, seeing what he would be like with this team, and then deciding at the end of next year, do you want to draft somebody? Or they could draft someone now and do the Alex Smith thing, play it out, and then let him move on in free agency and go on with his life. But I think I walked out of the press conference. Theoretically, I was on jury duty. You were there. I was on jury duty. But watching the press conference back, I came away thinking that in 2023, at very least, there will be a different quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. I mean, you consider that the length of the contract, Kwesi's contract, and presumably O'Connell's 4-year deals. Do you want to tie yourself to Kirk Cousins for 3 of those 4 years or whatever an extension might look like for a quarterback that, is 500 through 120 career starts? Probably not. It probably doesn't make a lot of financial sense. It doesn't make sense just from your own security as an employee. And you want to build this team kind of in your own image. You want to get your guys in here. You want to get guys that have upside that you can coach up. So in every sense, to me, the move is to make a move, whether that's this week, whether it's after the draft, whether it's after next season. I think it's coming within, 365 days.
So when it comes to how Kevin O'Connell wants to put together his defense, Ed Donatel is going to be the defensive coordinator. But I thought it was very interesting to hear him talk about how the best defenses in the league are not really traditional 3-4, even though that's what Ed Donatel comes from, that they mix their fronts and they use players in a lot of different ways. And it feels to me like they could have much more of a fluid defense as opposed to rigid, where Mike Zimmer wanted certain types of players in certain types of roles to play his system, and then he would sort of make adjustments to the scheme from there. It feels much more like they're going to try to gather talent and then put it on the field the best way they see fit. And it also sounds like Kevin O'Connell is very realistic about the fact that this team needs cornerbacks. They need people who can cover. He was very complimentary of Harrison Smith, in part because Harrison Smith is basically the only proven guy in the entire secondary at this point.
Yeah, on the defensive line, I guess if there was one wrinkle last year that we saw that was a little different is they were more positionless than usual. They would use a lot of their outside guys on the inside. They occasionally mix their fronts. And I think we're going to see a lot of that with this new regime. It means that if you go get a player like Anthony Barr, not necessarily Anthony Barr, that they might be in more of that hybrid role where they can be a stand-up edge rusher while still being an outside linebacker. That's something we haven't seen here in a while. And I think people always envisioned Anthony Barr being that pass rushing threat, but because of the scheme, it was never really a possibility for him except for the occasional blitz. I think that the defensive line is something to watch because in that same discussion, Kevin O'Connell did not mention Danielle Hunter's name as a player who he's excited about. Mentioned Harrison Smith, mentioned Eric Kendricks. There's one more staple on that defense. His name's Danielle Hunter, and he did not get mentioned. So I think there's certainly ambiguity about his status with that gigantic contract, that cap number that's untenable. And O'Connell maybe not wanting to commit to Hunter being here because there is uncertainty and they're going to have to negotiate with him.
Yeah, which I think was another smart way of approaching it for Kevin O'Connell, that he didn't want to just pour praise on Danielle Hunter, though he deserves it for what he's done in the past, probably in part because you just don't want to commit in any way to saying, oh, yeah, we just can't live without this player. And it's like, oh, okay, well, then how much money are you giving me in a contract extension? Like, you don't want to put yourself in the bad spot. I also wonder, like, how much to read into that. He's thinking off the top of his head, naming good players he knows. He would have prepared for the Vikings a few weeks before when the Rams played the Vikings, and Danielle Hunter was not a part of that. So he kind of talked as if, oh yeah, that's right, we had to prepare for Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks. So I don't know how much stock to put in that as we try to read between the lines. I think that the Hunter situation more or less has to go contract extension or they move on from him. And I mean, we don't know which way it's going to go. I'm not sure that I came away definitive on that. Two more things. Analytics he talked about. Now, what we've heard in a lot of press conferences for new coaches is, well, analytics are a tool, but they're not everything. That was actually not how Kevin O'Connell talked about analytics. He called them a weapon, which I think points to this team fully leaning into it between Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, who there's no question about his appreciation for numbers and doing things process driven. But I think that what we're going to see is these two be on the same page in terms of following the data with their approach.
Yeah, and O'Connell mentioned too that he and Kwesi have already had these discussions about analytics and that he appreciates the way Kwesi presents them and he's really eager to listen to the recommendations he has. And I know that Kwesi is trying to separate himself from being the analytics guy per se. He doesn't want that to be his identity because he is more than that. But I think we're going to start seeing more decisions made by the book, quote unquote, where Mike Zimmer was a feel coach. And this, this regime often made contract decisions a little bit emotionally because of loyalty sometimes, because they wanted to keep their guys in-house. We could start seeing more on-field decisions that are based on data and win probability. We could see more roster building decisions that are built around positional value, contract value, stuff like that, which does give you that winning edge per se, even if it's just a couple extra percent.
And if we look at the Rams last year, they threw the ball much more often on early downs, early in games than the Minnesota Vikings. So I think even something small like that can give you X number of percentage points better to have a chance at winning. And those are the types of edges that a lot of teams are starting to get. This team wants to be at the forefront of that. Okay, last thing, culture, players, how they're treated, how much they're involved. This is a thing that's always easier to say than it is to stick with. But Kevin O'Connell talking about wanting to have the players feel ownership over what's going on the field and not just feel like I'm the coach, you're the player, is a 180-degree change from the way things were with Mike Zimmer. And over the years, Zimmer, I think, was a little more open to player feedback. But ultimately, when the players had a chance to tell us what was going on after Zimmer got fired, we didn't hear that sort of story, that they didn't feel that they were appreciated and their voices were heard. Kevin O'Connell being younger and being a former player, I think this is one where when he says it, I don't think it's just lip service. I think he truly believes in the players being much more a part of the process of designing the offense, giving feedback on how they want things to be, and feeling like they're a real part of that and not just, hey, you show up and do your job.
I'm going to be concise in my answer before my computer battery blacks out on you, but here's the one thing I like that he said. He said, I'm not going to hire a coach who doesn't connect one-on-one with his players. And even though you might be a little underwhelmed by some of the names on the coaching staff, maybe they're not established, maybe you haven't heard of them before, I think that personal connection is key, knowing how to communicate to your players, because this is a different generation of athletes, and that requires a different touch. And you can't treat them like it's 1980 anymore. Sometimes you have to be a little more tender in your approach, a little more communicative, have dialogue. And I think that Kevin O'Connell is going to approach it that way.
Okay, Sam, we'll charge your computer, and all of you go check out our new website, purpleinsider.com. You can find everything there, from our videos to our podcast to our articles, purpleinsider.com. Make sure you go check that out, and we will catch you next time on Purple Insider Extra.